From the moment Asus revealed the ROG Ally was real and not just an April Fool's joke, I've been psyched. Yeah, I know it's not the only handheld Windows gaming device out there, but the idea of a brand with so much prowess and portable, super powerful gaming laptops as Asus applying that knowledge to a handheld gaming device, yeah, it was too good to ignore. Add on top of that an all-new AMD APU that has theoretical performance nearing the PS5, a super light design with low fan noise, and a partnership with Microsoft to make Game Pass titles shine. This kind of looked like the Steam Deck killer we all knew was going to happen at some point. And I'll admit, I've been rooting for Asus to release that Steam Deck killer. Don't get me wrong, I love my Steam Deck, but that's despite a long list of problems it clearly has, some of which I'll dig into a little bit later. I want a device that delivers portable AAA gaming in a size that won't make me self-conscious if I pull it out on a plane, and with enough flexibility to play games that aren't just on Steam. The ROG Ally thankfully delivers that, but it introduces a host of its own problems in the process. So let me answer the big question up front. The ROG Ally is more powerful, flexible, and quieter than the Steam Deck. But the more I use the device, the clearer it was that that conclusion isn't as cut and dried as it seems at first. Before getting into the rest of the video though, make sure to leave a like and get subscribed so you don't miss any new videos from Digital Trends. Okay, so let's first talk about why we're comparing the Steam Deck and the ROG Ally in particular. And that really comes down to price. The ROG Ally comes in two configurations, one with AMD's Ryzen Z1 and the other with the Ryzen Z1 Extreme. The Z1 Extreme model, which is the one I have now and releases in June, goes for $700. Realistically, that's only $50 more than the Steam Deck. Yeah, I'm aware you can technically buy a Steam Deck for $400, but to get 512 gigabytes of storage, which is what the ROG Ally comes with, you'll need to spend $650. So in all practicality, the two are very close in price, and that's really important. Unlike other Windows handhelds we've seen, like the Ionea 2, this one is actually competitive with the Steam Deck when it comes to the price you'll actually spend. So is it worth the $50 upgrade? Well, when it comes to performance, yeah, no doubt. Apples to apples, the ROG Ally with the Z1 Extreme is anywhere from 15% to 50% faster than the Steam Deck depending on the game. If you compare the same game at the same settings and resolution, the ROG Ally will universally outperform the Steam Deck. But that really shouldn't come as much of a surprise. It's using a much newer and more powerful APU. What's surprising is how much quieter the ROG Ally is while pushing this level of performance. The fans don't really become noticeable unless you go up to its turbo mode. More on that in just a minute. Still, there's a little more to the story than just performance compared to the Steam Deck. The Steam Deck includes an 800p screen locked at 60 Hz. Meanwhile, the ROG Ally includes a 1080p screen that can go up to 120 Hz. At that resolution, the ROG Ally looks less like a performance upgrade and more like a quality upgrade over the Steam Deck. Naturally, if you push higher refresh rates and resolutions, you're going to lower your performance. And sure enough, at 1080p, the ROG Ally's numbers drop, and pretty substantially. Asus actually includes 3 different performance modes, unlike the Steam Deck. You have silent, performance, and turbo modes, as well as a bit of extra power if you run the turbo mode while the device is plugged in. These numbers don't necessarily show how you'd actually play these games. You'd probably go down to like a lower resolution and frame rate while in the silent mode, for example, but it does a good job of showing the range of performance. Believe it or not though, performance is actually the least interesting part of the ROG Ally. We need to talk about usability. Now, physically, the ROG Ally feels pretty solid. It's both smaller and lighter than the Steam Deck, but not necessarily more comfortable. I still prefer the feel of the Steam Deck in my hands, but there's no doubt that it feels kind of unruly because it's just so big. The ROG Ally feels closer to a Nintendo Switch with a grip, kind of like this one I have here. The big problem for the Ally is that the grips are kind of thin, so they don't really protrude out the back like the Steam Deck does. And given the huge back buttons, it doesn't really feel like you're holding on to handles. Instead, you kind of naturally press the device between your palms. There's a little bit of trade-off here. It's not quite as comfortable as the Steam Deck, but its size makes it feel a little more manageable. Where the Ally takes a clear back seat is in buttons. This isn't Switch Joy-Con levels of bad, but it's shocking just how much worse the thumbsticks, triggers, and especially the D-pad feel compared to the Steam Deck. The Steam Deck feels like you're using a first-party controller, where the ROG Ally feels like the $30 knockoff controller you'd force your friend to use. Like, it's serviceable, it's just not ideal. Usability from a software standpoint is, Well, it's complicated. So the Steam Deck uses SteamOS. That's a Linux-based operating system that uses Valve's Proton compatibility layer to run games built for Windows on Linux. The Steam Deck separates its desktop and gaming experiences, so when you boot the device, you're met with a controller-based gaming mode, and you have to reboot into desktop mode if you want to use it like that. There are two worlds for the Steam Deck, and that is not at all the case for the ROG Ally. It's Windows 11 all the way, so when you boot it up, you're met with a Windows lock screen and you land on the desktop. Instead of two separate experiences, Asus's Armory Crate runs on top of Windows, and it tries to emulate what SteamOS has in its gaming mode. Asus includes a dedicated button for Armory Crate, so you always can get back to it even when you're on the desktop. And there's a quick access menu that you can customize with different settings that you can open with a different dedicated button. It's really clear, honestly, that Asus is making a big attempt to provide the portable gaming experience without forcing you onto the desktop. That effort doesn't always pay off, though. First off, you can't see your library of games. Armory Crate hooks into the EA app, GOG Galaxy, Ubisoft Connect, the Epic Games Store, Steam, and the Xbox app, but it only scans games from those libraries that you already have installed. You can't do any management from Armory Crate, so you have to go to the desktop to actually install and uninstall games. They only show up in the app after you've already installed them. And this can lead to some pretty unfortunate situations if you're jumping between games. There's no way to force a game to close through Armory Crate. So there were a few times where I would go to boot up a game on the Xbox app, only to find that a game on Steam didn't close properly and was actually running in the background. This sends you down a loop of opening Task Manager, trying to find the process, and manually closing it. You can kind of see this as more of a laptop experience and not a handheld console experience. For the Steam Deck, you have an operating system that's mimicking a console. With the ROG Ally, you have a laptop with a utility that mainly focuses on managing your device and launching your games. Asus does at least make an effort, and I will give it that. One of the biggest areas that's apparent is in controller modes. You have the option between game mode, desktop mode, or a mode that automatically goes between the two. You have separate key bindings for each, so you can set up a controller profile that works well for desktop. In addition, the touchscreen is much more responsive than the Steam Deck, so although you'll have to go to the desktop to install games and configure settings, it's not as much of a hassle as it is on the Steam Deck. Now I want to write the Steam Deck off here. It has controller profiles as well, and they're actually connected to Steam itself, so you can browse community profiles instead of spending time configuring your own. I think the boost for the ROG Ally is that you have separate desktop and gaming modes that you can select through a quick access menu. That may can do something like run an emulator on the desktop and use the desktop mode to configure it and quickly switch over to the game mode to actually start playing. And you can bind commands like opening your task manager or showing your desktop to certain buttons. Oh, and just as a side note on emulators here, both devices are really good for emulating games. That's one of the reasons I even like these devices in the first place, but I prefer the Ally just a little bit more because it uses Windows. That means I can dump ROMs to a micro SD card on my desktop and slot it in without messing around with the Linux file system to the Windows file system. If you emulate games a lot, you'll know what I'm talking about. Just a small note. Okay, but actually using the device, which is better? The Steam Deck, but there are really trade-offs either way. I'm kind of using the Switch as a gold standard here. You turn it on, select your icon, and start playing a game. The Steam Deck is closer to that than the ROG Ally is, no question. And a big reason why is that you can manage your games through the OS on the Steam Deck. On the Steam Deck quick access screen, you can force close a game, for example, which you can't do with the Ally. You have to go back to the main menu and manually close it. For me though, the biggest difference is that you can properly rest the Steam Deck just like a console. Press the power button and it'll suspend your game. You can technically do that with the ROG Ally, but Windows will eventually move the device into a lower resting state, sometimes shutting it off entirely. Now, for the time I use the ROG Ally, my games never fully shut down if I suspended this way, even if I left it overnight. But it's definitely worrying. It doesn't inspire a lot of confidence for that pick up and play style of handheld gaming that the Steam Deck does pretty well. The Steam Deck does that well because it's built on Linux. Sure, it provides a more seamless gaming experience, but it's also way more limited. You have access to a way longer list of games on the ROG Ally, including games that are straight up unsupported on the Steam Deck, like Destiny 2, and the big one, Xbox Game Pass. Hi-Fi Rush, Psychonauts 2, Weird West. There are a ton of Game Pass games that I would love to take on the go with me, but I just haven't been able to play on my Steam Deck unless I rebuy them on Steam. And I'm aware you can install Windows on the Steam Deck, but it's not great. So for the purposes of this comparison, I'm focused on what you can do out of the box. Because frankly, That's how both of these devices are best experienced, and that's how most people are going to use them. There's a trade-off to having access to all of your games on the ROG Ally though, and that's that it's never clear if the games will work. For example, I installed Star Wars Jedi Survivor on the ROG Ally and it would consistently crash before I could even get to the settings screen. The Steam Deck still has its Deck Verified program. Sure, it's not perfect. Some games are verified that have problems, and some games that are unsupported work just fine. But overall, you can generally trust that a verified badge means the game is going to work. With the ROG Ally, it's more like a Windows laptop. You can run any game, or at least attempt to boot it up, but will it crash? Will you have controller issues? Will there be some driver conflict? Well, you just have to try it and see. And I don't want to belabor this point here, but it is important to recognize that the ROG Ally feels much closer to a laptop than a handheld gaming console. It's a lot more flexible, but you'll have to get your hands dirty actually configuring it and installing Windows updates and things you just really never have to think about on the Steam Deck. All right, but let's pivot away from that and talk battery life. The talk of the town when the ROG Ally was announced was that its battery life would be terrible, mainly due to the screen. Remember, this is a 1080p screen with a 120 Hz refresh rate, and it tops out at 500 nits. The Steam Deck, meanwhile, has an 800p screen at 60 Hz and only 400 nits. But even despite the bump in resolution and refresh rate, the ROG Ally's battery life ain't too bad. So at turbo mode in Cyberpunk 2077, I got about an hour out of the device. And in performance mode, just under 2 hours. I think it was an hour and like 53 minutes. That's not great, but this is really a stress test. In turbo mode, it was sucking down between 35 and 40 watts, at least according to the performance monitor that Asus includes, and it was pinning the GPU at close to 100% utilization. There is a wide range for battery life between both the Steam Deck and the ROG Ally, but getting about 2 hours in a demanding AAA game at 30 FPS, that's what you'd expect out of the Steam Deck, and the ROG Ally is delivering that at a higher resolution. You can get a lot longer too. I booted up Gunfire Reborn, which is a game I would definitely play on like a long flight or something over Cyberpunk. And in the silent mode, I got over 4.5 hours of battery life while the game was locked at 60 FPS. You have options to limit the power of the APU, bump down the refresh rate to 60 Hz, and set a frame rate cap. So no, you aren't going to play Cyberpunk at 1080p in turbo mode for 4 hours, but you have a lot of options to improve battery life. You could get 4 or 5, maybe even 6 hours out of the device if you're playing something like Dead Cells. Overall, I'd say it's about on par with the Steam Deck. You're given the same amount of options for conserving battery, and that's while the device is driving a higher resolution. It's not great battery life. The Steam Deck doesn't have great battery life either, but it's not running out of juice in 20 minutes like some of the pre-release speculation thought it might. The Steam Deck has similar battery saving options, but the big boost is an adjustable refresh rate. For the ROG Ally, you have the option between 60 Hz and 120 Hz, nowhere in between. The Steam Deck can go anywhere from 40 Hz up to 60 Hz. Dropping down to 40 Hz or 45 Hz is a huge way to save battery life on the Steam Deck, and I would really love to see something like that in the ROG Ally. However, the Steam Deck has a major issue with battery life, and that is this well-known battery bug. Essentially, certain models that come with a particular Wi-Fi chip will trick the battery into thinking it's dead whenever you turn on Wi-Fi, turn off Wi-Fi, or change networks. So that means when you charge it and boot it back up, the battery will only last a few minutes because it's only using a very small portion of the total capacity. There's a workaround for this bug. It's well documented online, but my Steam Deck is one of the affected models, and unfortunately, I'm not the only one. Now, I don't know if a Steam Deck you get will have this problem or if the ROG Ally will show more issues over time. I've seen several Steam Decks that don't have it, but it's still something to be aware of. And it's the reason I can't really do a one-to-one battery life comparison because my Steam Deck's battery has just been all over the place and it will lose again and again and again. All right, a couple of quick hits before I get out of here. First, both devices charge with USB-C and you're free to hook up an external dock to connect peripherals. The ROG Ally supports Asus's XG Mobile external GPU as well. The Steam Deck doesn't have official support for an external GPU, and although you can technically connect one, it requires some serious modding. Point for the ROG Ally if you want to break it out for a desktop experience. In addition, both devices come with a 3.5mm headphone jack and a micro SD card slot, and they both support Bluetooth 5. Wi-Fi is a bit better on the ROG Ally though because it supports Wi-Fi 6E if you have a supported router. The big question though, what would I buy? The ROG Ally. More games, better performance, acceptable battery life with a much nicer screen. Yeah, it's a clear upgrade over the Steam Deck for sure. That doesn't mean it's free of problems though. It feels more like a laptop with a controller than a handheld game console, and you have to get your hands dirty on the desktop to actually get anything set up. But if anything, I'd take that over some of the bizarre bugs I've seen on the Steam Deck where games will suddenly disappear from my library, or I have 90 downloads queued, or the battery dies in 5 minutes when it shouldn't. There's a lot more to talk about with the ROG Ally, so if you want to know about the interface, quick access menus, everything else about that device, I cover it in my full review, which you can find linked in the description below. While you're down there, leave me a comment. Are you going to pick up the ROG Ally? Are you more for the Steam Deck? Let me know. And also let me know if you want to see some follow-up videos where we maybe test some more games on our device or look further into battery life. Maybe I can get my hands on a Steam Deck that doesn't have a crazy battery bug. Let me know, and make sure to leave a like on this video and get subscribed. All right, everyone, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.